Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank Congressman Bishop for his excellent questioning. And gentlemen, I come to this with the view that our software and search engines and data mining tools can go a long way to beating the terrorists, but we just aren't using what we've got because we've got all these separate government fiefdoms, in effect running databases strewn all over Washington, D.C., and they've either been unwilling or unable to get together so they're connected and then give us the best possible strategy to pick up dangerous trends. And to change this, I wrote legislation that is now in the intelligence conference. We're working on it now, that would create a single database where all U.S. information on terrorists from the intelligence community, other federal agencies, and state and local officials can be gathered together and shared with any intelligence or law enforcement official who needs information on suspected terrorists. And what this ensures, and Commissioner Norris, I think you summed it up, this ensures that everybody's on the same team, federal, state, and local. And I hear this from law enforcement officials in Oregon. You've echoed it again. You're not going to win the war on terrorism from Washington, D.C. Much of the important work is going to have to be done at the local level. And the reason I bring this up this morning, Mr. Chairman, is that with this item in conference right now, I hope that what we have heard from these 6 very good witnesses will give us additional strength in terms of getting that terrorist identification classification system properly funded in the conference. It should be decided, as we all know, very shortly. And gentlemen, I think you've given us some very helpful information to get that properly funded. Let me begin my questioning, if I might, with Mr. Manno. The TSA Office of Civil Aviation Security Intelligence is formerly the FAA's Intelligence Division. And I want to begin with you, and particularly some of the history. I mean, there is years and years of history, beginning in December of 1994 with the Algerian armed Islamic group terrorists. They're hijacking the Air France flight in Algiers and threatening to crash it into the Eiffel Tower. The 1995 evidence came from the Philippine National Police raid, turning up materials in a Manila apartment, talking about crashing an airplane into CIA headquarters. There is years and years of history with respect to the proposition that terrorists are willing to use airplanes as the tool to carry out their agenda. Given that, and my understanding is that FAA at that time had some of that information, why wasn't it used to put in place a comprehensive set of new security procedures so that, for example, let's say in the late 1990s, by the late 1990s there could have been a requirement for hardening those cockpit doors. Why wasn't that information that was developed beginning in a serious way in 1994 used to put in place tough new security procedures by, let's say, the late 1990s?
Well, Senator Wyden, we started to take a real close look and perceive the change in the threat environment dating back to 1994. In fact, we worked very closely with the National Intelligence Council and asked for and received a threat assessment, a national threat assessment that was produced by CIA and FBI. And at that point, actually invited in for classified briefings a wide range of representatives from the aviation industry and airports, associations like the Air Transport Association, in order to explain to them that the threat had in fact changed from what it was previously, and specifically with respect to some of the radical Islamist groups that appeared at that point to be in this country. That effort, our ability to actually provide classified briefings. Ironically enough, the briefer on from the FBI side of the House, because the briefing was actually presented by CIA officers and FBI officers was John O'Neill, who subsequently perished in the World Trade Center. Based on that, there were a number of measures that were implemented that changed what was the baseline security measures that had been in effect at that point. In the case of the industry, there is always a desire to know why the regulatory agencies, in this case FAA, is requiring additional measures because those things cost money. So that effort, with the help of the community, helped us to convince them that the change a threat. And there were a number of specific things that were, in fact.
On that point, did you go to the industry in, say, the late 1990s and say we need changes like hardening the cockpit doors, and they were unwilling to support that?
What we do with the industry, there is an ongoing effort to keep them apprised of the general threat, of changes in the threat, in changes of MOs by terrorist groups. And we've done that in a number of different ways, either through the unclassified information circulars and directives that we sent out, the briefings that we have conducted for them, even to the point where we produced a CD that was disseminated to over 750 elements throughout the industry that spelled out in great detail what the threat was, the fact that it was changing. In fact, it even mentioned the possibility of suicide attacks. Again, this was something that was not necessarily based, it was not based on any specific information that we had received from the community that indicated that these terrorist groups were in fact planning something like this. But it was a notion that it was a possibility.
With respect to al-Midhar and al-Hazami, did your agency have the names of those two hijackers prior to September 11th, 2001?
No, sir, we did not.
If you had, what steps would have been taken had you had that information?
Well, prior to 9/11, we had a process. We had a so-called watch list, which was disseminated to the industry via the security directive process. In fact, a number of the people that we suspected were involved in what we call the Manila plot, the Bojinka plot, as you refer to it, were on that list. And again, the purpose of that process was to highlight for the air carriers particular individuals that had ties to terrorist groups and that presented a threat to aviation, who should either be denied boarding or should be, if they showed up for boarding, be called to the attention of law enforcement. Had we had information that those two individuals presented a threat to aviation or were posed a great danger, we would have put them on that list, and they should have been picked up in the reservation process.
Is your intelligence office connected to the major watch lists like tip-off?
We now have access to tip-off through Intel Link and CT Link.
Has your office ever had direct access to the National Criminal Information Center data that is maintained by the Department of Justice and the FBI?
Currently, we don't, but we have liaison officers that are posted to CIA and to FBI, where they sit side by side with other officers from INS and Customs. And so they're able to access it that way. We're also in the process we're in negotiations with the Customs Service to get access to their text system with a terminal that will be placed in our intelligence watch, which would then give us access to NCIC. So we have indirect access to NCIC through our liaison officers, and hopefully soon we'll have it directly.
Does your agency believe that when there's intelligence information related to a potential threat to civil aviation, that you're now getting unfettered access to all of the intelligence, including the raw intelligence?
I don't think that there's any question in the minds of the agencies that produce the intelligence that if there is specific threat information that we need to act on, that is provided to us. I think what we may still not be receiving is what Mr. Andre alluded to before, is the background information that would help our analysts in better understanding the threat environment. We do that to a great extent now in producing threat assessments. The analysts that work in our Office of Intelligence come from the community. We hire them from other agencies, so they bring that perspective, and that has helped. And that kind of information would, in fact, help us do our job better.
Let me ask you specifically about the Phoenix memo, obviously the memo where the FBI agent created an analytical product detailing suspected terrorists seeking flight training. When did your office first see that Phoenix memo?
The first time that we saw it was when it was brought to our attention by the committee staff when they came to visit us.
And when was that?
So that was...
Is it correct that you first saw that memo even after congressional hearings?
The actual memo, yes, we did not see it until the committee staff brought it to our attention.
And when was that?
I don't know the exact date. We can get that for you, though.
But I'm correct in saying that you didn't get to see this memo, which many of us felt was an enormously important message. You didn't get to see it, not just before September 11th. You didn't get to see it until after congressional hearings were held looking into this issue. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. How would your office have responded to the Phoenix memo if you had received it prior to September 11th of 2001?
Well, I think we would have started to ask a lot more probing questions of FBI as to what this was all about to start with. There were a number of things that were done later to try to determine, what connections these people may have had to flight schools by going back to the Airmen registry in Oklahoma City that's maintained by the FAA to try to identify additional people. In fact, and that's what goes on right now. The law enforcement agencies, of course, have access to that database. And whenever we, on an ongoing daily basis, whenever our watch works...
Would you have treated that as priority business? In other words, would you have stopped other business to go after that?
Well, we take all threats seriously. In fact, our process is whenever we get a threat, we open what we call an ICF, an intelligence case file. And that's so that we segregate that issue from the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other intelligence reports that we get, and then we focus on it. And the work that may entail in trying to determine whether this is a credible threat, something that needs to be acted upon, may be by going back and working with FBI to try to get additional information. In some cases, it can be working with the State Department or the CIA if it requires overseas work. So we make all efforts to try to get to the bottom of what this is all about.
What recommendations have you all made regarding suspect flight training, and have any of those recommendations been implemented since after September 11th?
There are a number of things that have been done. There was an effort to sensitize flight schools and fixed base operators that rent aircraft to report suspicious activity immediately to law enforcement agencies. These are the people that can best identify whether somebody that is seeking training in their schools or seeking to rent an aircraft. That's the best chance that we have that somebody like that will be identified and reported to law enforcement. There also is an effort actually by the Justice Department to vet people from other countries that seek to come to this country to obtain flight training, where they will have to, in essence, undergo a background investigation before they're actually allowed to take training.
I'm going to move on to questions from others, Mr. Manno, but I want it understood that with the FAA getting the Phoenix memo, in early May of this year, 2002. And the FBI agent having written it in the summer of 2001, I don't think there is a more graphic example of how dysfunctional this system is. And this is what's got to be changed. We're going to try and do it with the terrorist identification classification system. I think some of the examples you've given us today are very helpful. But this example is what the reform agenda has got to be all about. You can't explain that to the public, that something that important, that significant, that was available in the summer of 2001 can't find its way to your agency until May of 2002. Oh, I'm going to move on, but Mr. Chairman, this is something I feel very strongly about. If we're going to get the jump on the terrorists, this is the kind of information that's got to make its way through the system. Ambassador Taylor, let me, if I might, turn to you on the question of needing more personnel. It's something that's been touched on several times this morning. Do you need more personnel to process the information that's received? Is this a question of personnel or lack of technology? Tell us what you think the challenge is.
Sir, you're speaking in terms of the information we receive for our, within our visa system, or just more broadly?
The information you need to get through, and certainly you've touched on the major areas what I'm talking about.
Certainly, we have made a major investment in technology, and will continue to make that investment in technology. We do require interface with the intel community to broaden perhaps the top-off database to include more databases. We've not been funded for that purpose, and certainly should that be the case, I think our Secretary has had discussions with Director Tennant on that issue and would look for a collective effort with the Director to expand the top-off database with other data from CIA databases. I'm not in a position here to tell you that I need X number more people or X number more dollars for technology, except to say, sir, that we are focusing very squarely on this need. We just completed our 2004 budget review with the Deputy Secretary. I think he believes very strongly that he will reflect those priorities when that budget comes forward, and our department has no higher priority than to focus and improve on our system and the availability of our system to other members of the federal, state, and local government.
Governor Gilmore, a question for you, and we've enjoyed working with you over the years. As you know, I chair the Science and Technology Subcommittee as well, and enjoyed our relationship. Tell me, if you would, what major recommendations did your advisory panel make that have yet to be fulfilled by the administration, the Congress, and other governmental bodies?
Most of the recommendations that we have made have in fact been adopted. We've made about 80 or so, Senator Wyden. I think that where our focus is right now is on what we're going to be doing in this coming report this December. And on that, I believe we're going to be focusing on the need for a unified fusion center for the purpose of bringing together information from all sources. The emphasis on the questioning today has been on the information, exchange of information through databases. But our focus has been on the cultural changes that need to be made, and we will probably recommend a fusion center, probably a standalone independent organization that would be in a position to bring information together from all different sources and pull it together. With respect to other recommendations that have not been made, have not been at this point implemented, we don't believe there's been a sufficient focus by the federal government on the necessity of working together with states and locals, particularly the exchange of information. For example, we have suggested that there be major procedures and processes put into place in order to share important information, even after analyzed, Senator, with state officials, governors, and then key officials in the localities. Nothing like that has been done, nor hardly discussed. Even now, most of the discussion is among federal agencies and the exchange of information as opposed to the true creation of a national strategy.
See if I can get one last question in. Mr. Andre, the former DIA Director Admiral Wilson has told the Joint Inquiry staff that he was never sure that he received all of the available intelligence information. He also said that senior defense officials received information that his analysts did not receive. And he questioned what good, in effect, it did for him to be aware of intelligence information that his analysts did not receive. So my question to you is, what impact prior to 9/11 did the withholding of some intelligence information from analysts have on the DIA's ability to do the kind of all-source analysis that's needed to do the job properly?
That's, of course, a tough question because we don't know what we don't know. But it brings up a point, particularly the issue of information going to very senior officials and not to the analysts. You notice in my statement I talked about information that was not subjected to analytic scrutiny. I think that's the key. We're pleased when a collection agency whispers in the ear of the Secretary of Defense or the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or the Director of DIA, and that's good. However, to extract meaning from that data, to perform the true analytic function, we need to get that information into the hands and the brains of analysts who are paid to fill in the gaps of missing information, to compensate for absent evidence, and to turn information into knowledge. That's what we pay them to do. If they don't have the information, they can't do that. So it's hard to judge what the impact of missing information was, except to say categorically that our knowledge thus was incomplete.
Chairman, thank you.